Hello, hello everyone. It's Let's Talk Sex Tuesday. It's a rainy afternoon where I am. I'm all cozy in my little office. And today I'm really excited because it's Midwifery Week. And midwives are awesome. I had the great privilege of using one for my first delivery. And so I wanted to celebrate today and share a little bit about my birth story, about my experience with midwifery, and answer any questions that I can about midwifery. I'm not an expert in it, but definitely love all things birth and babies, and thought this would be a great opportunity to share. Heads up, definitely going to be sharing my birth story today. So if that's not a thing that you are into or can manage today, then feel free to move on by and come back another time. There isn't, I had a really positive birth experience, so there's nothing overwhelmingly negative that I'll be sharing today, but I know that birth stories can be challenging depending on where we're at today. So I just wanted to give that kind of caveat. So before we dive in, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about Midwifery Week and maybe give you some context about what midwifery looks like where I live. So for those of you who are far and wide, I live in the Yukon in Canada. I live in northern Canada. I live in a community called Whitehorse, and we're about 35,000 people. And midwifery in the Yukon is still unregulated and unfunded. So in almost every other province in Canada, midwifery is regulated and it's funded as part of the healthcare system. So whenever you're pregnant, you can go and choose midwifery as an option through like the regular medical care system. And in Whitehorse in the Yukon, that is not the case as of yet. Legislation is being worked on right now with the, sorry, I'm just moving my light. Legislation is being worked on right now with the Midwifery Association of Yukon and Yukon government. Oh, that's a very bright light. So things are changing. So what that means for my context was that I chose to personally pay for a midwife. And I did so in an unregulated system with someone who has many, many years of experience and has delivered many, many babies. And it also means that I sort of participated in both systems for a little while until I got to a place where I sort of made a decision about what I wanted to do. So I'm just going to start today by talking about like why I chose a midwife and what that experience kind of looked like for me, especially if you live up here or maybe somewhere else where the midwife situation is the same. It's really cool to know about this kind of different option, right? So I actually didn't really know much about midwives before I got pregnant. I mean, I kind of had an inkling, but it was actually my husband who suggested that I use a midwife or consider using a midwife. And that was partially because he had an experience with a midwife with the birth of his son. And so we ended up reaching out to the same midwife and chatting with her. And I definitely knew going into my pregnancy that I wasn't really like super stoked on the way the medical system tends to work, right? So I know the doctors have a very limited time system for how they can see you. You know, it's like 15-minute appointments, you're in and out. It's all tends to be like pretty medically focused. So they're looking at your body, they're looking at your like health, but no one's really talking with you if they have the time, like about your emotions and about how you're feeling or answering your questions. And it's not a lot of time. You're kind of on your own in this journey unless you're needing additional support. So I knew that I wanted more than that if I could do it. And I was also curious about home birth. I did have several friends who had home birth experiences. And on the one hand, I really liked the notion of being able to stay in the comfort of my home and delivering, you know, naturally without drugs and all that fun stuff. But I did also have some cautions. There is sort of a safety that can come from being in a medical environment where, all of the tools are there in case anything goes awry. And I think that's part of how we grow up and the mindset that we kind of get, because midwifery births are very, very safe, often safer than hospital births for lots of different reasons. And there's really great research out there about that. So yeah, I was curious about a home birth, open to it. And I mean, I live downtown and very close to the hospital as well. So that was a big sort of part of my decision-making process. And I wanted to be more supported. I wanted to be more held through this process and have somebody to kind of guide me through, I guess, more of like the spiritual dimensions of becoming a mother or the emotional dimensions of becoming a mother. So that's what we did. We went with a midwife, and for a while we ended up doing both doctor appointments and midwife appointments. So I would see my midwife, like once a month or however frequently it is in the beginning. I'd see the doctor the same amount. Because midwives aren't regulated or certified and all that funded yet, my midwife couldn't order any tests, so I would be getting the tests done through the regular medical system and then sharing those results with my midwife. She would be doing all the same visits with me. So every time I saw her, she was checking my blood pressure, checking, the size of my belly, checking for heartbeat, checking my weight, checking my pee, all those fun things, as well as chatting with me about how I was feeling, about my diet, exercise, those kinds of things. And from the very start, I just felt, so much more supported in the midwifery model. I mean, I'm also just like paying privately for this person's time. But sometimes my visits were an hour, sometimes they were 3 hours. I got a whole like birth mechanics and labor like explanation with her, which meant I didn't need to go to prenatal classes, which was kind of nice, except I missed sort of meeting other moms who were going through that process. But it was really great to just sit around my kitchen table every week in the later stages and talk about the amazingness that is your human body when you deliver a baby, and to have all of my questions answered and to feel so supported in that process, right? And the one thing that really stuck with me throughout that whole process was that midwives are in the business of, birthing babies and mothers, right? So there's equal emphasis on the mother and the child in this process. And I really felt that in my experience. I believe midwifery is regulated in the Northwest Territories, which is my neighbor. And it was actually the first time I ever heard about a midwifery-led births. I've been living there for a while, and I was chatting with a friend who was telling me this difference between the 15-minute medical appointments and the, hour-long appointment with her midwife. So in some places it is funded and regulated. I'd love to hear if you're watching live or commenting later. Did you have the pleasure of working with a midwife in your process? How did that go for you? Did you experience dual systems or just one? What does birthing look like where you live in the world? Because that's the other thing, right? Is like we grow up here in the West and we have one mindset on how birthing happens, and midwives are actually like basically baby delivering doctors in many other places around the world. Doctors assist midwives because midwives are the experts in delivery, in breech babies, in all of the things, right? So midwives are amazing humans. They're so well trained. It's a much more holistic model, so they have all the medical background and training to deal with bodies and health and all that stuff, but they're also really focused on the emotional support of the mother, right? So 9 months later, I stopped going to my medical appointments with my docs in the latter part. Didn't feel the need to be seeing both people every week. Mind you, I didn't have many complications. There was a worry for a little while that I didn't get very big, but we did some tests and everything seemed to be okay. So I was just feeling confident with the system that we had, and knew that I could always go see my doctor if I felt the need to, or if I had any questions, which was always really nice. And ultimately, I decided to go with a home birth. So I didn't step foot in a hospital. Basically, my baby was 7 days late, I think. So she was due late June, and she came July 3rd. So I went into labor, or like pre-labor, on Canada Day. I was going for a family walk and started feeling kind of that period cramp that you read so much about. Was uncomfortable throughout the evening. By midnight, I was trying to go to bed and I couldn't sleep, really. I was quite uncomfortable. By 1 o'clock in the morning, I was on my couch, and about every 10 minutes or so, I would rotate onto all fours and sort of moan and groan and move around for a few minutes, and then I would lie back down, rest for 10 minutes, and just rotated back and forth, kind of like a rotisserie sausage or something, all night, with my husband lying on the floor next to me, trying to be supportive, and both of us just trying to rest as much as we could in this lead up period. So we called my midwife at midnight. She told us to just, hang tight and be in touch if things progressed any further. And she came at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was still rotating on the couch. My mom came by and brought her coffee. We put Sherlock Holmes on, and that pretty much continued for me throughout most of the day. So my midwife could have gone home, but she stayed with me at my request. She was in it for the long haul. And I can't even remember what time it is anymore. It was early afternoon, maybe. My midwife, she sat us down. She looked us in the eye, she said, okay. So, things were happening pretty regularly. They're kind of slowing down and getting a bit more sporadic. We either need to slow this down so you can get some rest and rest up for later, or we need to get this going. And what I suggest is that you go into the bedroom. I'm going to go in my car. Your mom can go for a walk. I want you to attempt to make love, stimulate some hormones. So I thought about it for a good long while. If you've been there, I was definitely feeling torn between wanting things to stop and slow down and take a break, and wanting it to just all be over. Bear in mind, this was the early hours yet of a 12-hour delivery. So we decided to go for the gusto. We went into the bedroom. We started fooling around, and we were barely fooling around, and all of a sudden, things started to hurt more and progress a little more. So we were back to the races. So things continued like that. I ate some watermelon. I puked up some watermelon. I watched my Sherlock. We chilled. We relaxed. We talked about the news. I just laid on my couch. Moved around the living room. I think we went for a walk outside. We tried dancing, you're just in and out of that discomfort. And things were opening, but very slowly, right? So we finally hit kind of a point where things were moving. And I just remember it was the beginning of the oh my God, is this over yet? Which was just the beginning of the second half of my journey. And I just remember I had tried going to the bathroom, and that wasn't really working. And I have had this overwhelming need to lie down. My cervix was quite open, but not all the way. There was still a lip that was kind of caught on the baby's head. And so I go into my bedroom, and I'm headed to my bed, and my vagina just pukes. And I'm like, oh my God, I peed all over my bed. And the midwife comes in, and she's like, no, I think your water broke. So I'm lying in bed, I'm breathing. There's just all this intense downward pressure. My cervix is opening, but not quite. And I think one of the things I wasn't quite prepared for in birth was how involuntary the pushing experience was for me. So I know that you sort of actively participate in the pushing, but I didn't know that your body is also just pushing. Your body is, puking in a downward motion. So my midwife was trying to encourage me to take that downward motion energy. Basically, the baby was like, I'm ready to come out, but my cervix wasn't opened all the way. So I'm trying to take that downward energy and move it out. So I'm lying there and I'm moaning and I'm going, I'm opening, I'm opening, I'm opening, I'm opening. I don't know how long I said that for, probably at least an hour. I'm opening, I'm opening, I'm opening. And I knew that my birth was going to be challenging for me on the fronts of surrender and opening, because these are challenges I have in my sex life. These are challenges I have with my orgasm. These are challenges I have in my life. And motherhood, delivery, I knew was going to be an epic lesson. It still is. And opening, letting go, releasing, and surrender, right? So this continues for a while. We get to the tub going, lots of warm water. This is pretty much my happy place. I'm on my belly. I'm on my back. At one point, we go on the birth stool. I did not like the birth stool, and I was so paranoid about hemorrhoids. I didn't want hemorrhoids, and I didn't want to tear. And I remember at one point, I'm like, on the stool, there's a mirror underneath me, and I'm looking, and I'm like, my bum is really hurting, my sacrum is really hurting, and I'm seeing something coming out, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm watching my bum come out of my body. Holy crow. And then we just realized that was a little bowel movement, and my midwife like, what? Sweep that up, get it out of the way. Yes, pooping happens during birth. So do many other beautiful, amazing things. So after a while, with much assistance and love, my cervix got opened. We think now that baby might have been, I'm going to forget the word, but her head might have been in the wrong direction. And then all of a sudden, whoop, she spinned herself around. And thus began the pushing. So if you'll remember, it was about 1 a.m. on Canada Day that like labor really started. And baby came at 1:09 a.m. on July 3rd, right? So I was in labor pretty much all day July 2nd. And yeah, then the pushing started. I pushed for about 2.5 hours. And I remember talking to one of the nurses in the early days about how I did about 12 hours of active, or 12 hours, 7 of active, 2.5 of pushing. And she was like, oh, what a perfectly average first birth. And Mira's also like 50th percentile. So it's all just perfectly average. Yeah, so then we were in the pool. This is where I was comfortable. This is where I wanted to stay. And the pushing began. And I had, there was a doula there as a second attendant. So much support the entire time from my midwife, from the doula, to make the choices that I wanted to make, to be informed and be given information about what was happening, so that I could decide what I wanted to do. Did I want to slow down? Did I want to speed up? Did I want to do it this way? Did I want to do it that way? I really felt like this birth was my birth, and I got to be in charge of it. And I know that that's not always people's experience. Certainly I have stories from my mother-in-law about almost fighting with the doctor about what should happen and what felt good. And so this was one of the biggest benefits to me of having a midwife, was that their whole approach, their whole philosophy, their whole perspective is that you know best. Your body knows best. And yes, they have some of that medical support and perspective, but they're going to give you that information and then honor the choices that you make that are feeling right. And not only that, my midwife really insisted that I make those choices. So when I tried to defer to her and when I tried to get her to make the decisions for me, she didn't let that happen. It was all about me and my choices. So we pushed and we pushed and we pushed and we pushed and we screamed and we screamed and we screamed and we moaned, a lot of moaning. I was doing a lot of my ocean breath, if you've done any of my Tantra stuff. So ocean breath with my mom and my husband and the midwife and my poor neighbors who are listening to us all through 1 a.m. I'd kind of forgotten about them. And then my beautiful baby girl came out. Her head popped out. I came out of my trance, right? This whole time you're just rocking and in this sort of like surreal trance. I came out of my trance as soon as her head popped out. And then she decided she was kind of done. So my body was like, oh yeah, we don't need to do any contractions anymore. So it took some convincing, one big push at the end. And there she was, my baby girl. And then I stood up, I pushed my placenta out. We all moved together, baby, placenta, husband, everyone to the couch. We cut the cord, we checked and made sure everyone was okay. I just got to relax on my couch and try breastfeeding. And then I was euphoric. I was full of energy. I changed my clothes, stuck my padsicle on, put on some Planet Earth, and began my journey with my child. So this is just an example of what a midwife-led birth looks like. She had a whole corner of my living room with all of her medical supplies, oxygen, all kinds of things that she needed to take care of me, and take care of the baby in case things were to go sideways in any way. And probably my favorite part of the whole experience of having a midwife was actually the postpartum care. So my midwife came daily for about 2 weeks, I think. And partially that was because I had a breast reduction when I was 19. We weren't sure what my breastfeeding was going to look like. So we were weighing her daily and the baby and making sure, monitoring my milk production to make sure that everything was going okay there. And then she came very regularly after that until baby was 6 weeks old, and she was available anytime if I was curious about the color of the baby's poop or a temperature or whether she was feeding enough or not. The first 3 months of breastfeeding were challenging for me. I had lots of lumps and bumps in my boobs. This one was slow. This one got a hole. Like she literally took a chunk out of my nipple. I was massaging heavily all the time. Like breastfeeding was this whole sit down, all the pillows, all the hands. Mira would eat like 45 minutes per boob sometimes. So it was tough. And I had my midwife the whole time supporting me. And, you know, my mom was there too, and she was so wonderful. And also, you know, readily admitting that she didn't always know what to do, and that it was great to have someone who's kind of up on all the birth science and up on all the latest with newborns. My midwife showed me how to bathe my baby in a little pot, in a little bin. She showed me how to gently move her in sort of rolling motions when I was changing her diaper and supporting her in those early days. And she really helped me to feel confident in my motherhood and to trust myself in my motherhood. And that is, you know, one of the primary jobs of a midwife, is to help you to feel supported in that. So yeah, that's my story. I mean, there's so many different things to dissect and explore, and lots of different ways that we can talk about babies. But the fact that it is Midwifery Week is just a reason to celebrate all things babies. The babies that have come, the babies that have not, the babies that we've lost, the babies that never were. Midwives and doulas support in all of this. And if you haven't used one before and you're curious, there is very likely a midwifery association where you live. So definitely you can start by researching there. They often have all of the stats and research on, you know, home births and midwifery-led birth, and they'll be able to tell you specifically about the scope of practice of midwives in your particular province or country or area. Because it's different everywhere. And like I said, we don't have a framework here in the Yukon yet. So it's hard to compare. That's all for today's live. If you have any questions about midwives, hit me up. I can pass you on to the right resources. If you want to share your story with me, I always love to hear birth stories. The good, the bad, the ugly, the hard, the impossible, the amazing. And yeah, share in the comments if you want, or pass along if you think this will be helpful to somebody. Have a lovely day, and I will catch you later. Bye.